Before we wrap up here, I do want to do one more segment on our good friends over at the Prager University, it's a storied institution that's tax deductible somehow. Kind of maybe to be nonpartisan. But anyway, here's some of the education they're doing. It's rehabilitating Robert E. Lee, the Confederate general. Now, it's what I find funny about this Prager video is, well, one, I mean, it's obvious the Robert E. Lee statue coming down in Richmond. Prager U trying to, they know their audience are people who are glad that Heather Heyer got hit by a car. Literally, I think this of Prager U, and so they're going to fish in those waters a little bit in the classier way that actual neo-Nazis can't. But so here's how they and this is Michael Medved, who's some old radio guy or something, and I think it's narrated by Will Witt. But it's funny to me because the narrator doesn't appear on screen, and if it is Will Witt, who usually does to appear coiffed with his hair all done nicely, the cool new young conservative, he's off screen for this one, and I think probably a wise decision. But anyway, here's their attempt to rehabilitate Robert E. Lee.
Who was Robert E. Lee?
Sick beat right off the bat.
Jesus Christ.
Statues of great historical figures
Oh my God.
are being torn down across America. Here are some facts about Lee that remind us why his statue should remain. Robert E.Lee was connected to George Washington through his father, Light Horse Harry Lee.
This is the
Now, yeah, let's stop there.
This is one of the there's a lot of dumb points that are coming, y'all. But honestly, I think this might be the stupidest, right? So yeah, he's related to George Washington. So we have to give him a statue. I don't understand that connection at all.
Yeah, I mean, I made the point before. There's a lot of people who are related to Thomas Jefferson who might deserve statues that are maybe not white. So maybe we should put up a statue to every descendant, black descendant of Thomas Jefferson. That'd be a funny statue that would teach us a lot about our history. Anyway, let's continue because the reasons don't really get any better.
They get way worse.
And his wife, Martha Washington's great-granddaughter.
Ooh.
Lee's home
it was an incestuous tobacco oligarchy. Surprise.
Very surprising that the insular, Virginia elite, have connections. Also, it's not the whole thing is disgusting, right? That logic is ridiculous. But look, these aren't people who live that far apart. Right? It's more interesting for somebody today to say I have relations to George Washington, right? Because it's that's 200 years ago, right? We're talking about 50, 60 years since George Washington passed away, and when these, Lee was a full grown adult. It's these aren't big connections.
Right.
Arlington House was just 10 miles from Washington's Mount Vernon.
Location.
It is the site of Arlington National Cemetery. After 30 years of military service, Lee led U.S. Marines to crush the attempted slave rebellion by radical abolitionist John Brown
my God.
in October 1859.
Again, so bad, right? I mean...
Which is also hilarious because they're going to try to dip their toes in the water of Robert E. Lee didn't like slavery. Robert E. Lee wasn't a defender of it. And it's okay, well, the first, because the first couple reasons they put up are just non-material reasons why he should have a statue, right? They're just he's related to some famous people and he built a house across the water from Washington, D.C., right? Where his grandfather or his relation actually he wasn't, Washington was in New York at that time. I don't want to get attacked in the chat later. But anyways, the first 2 points are when you're 13 years old and you have to write a history paper and you just get the first biographical information of somebody. It's they were born in this place. Those are essentially what those 2 points are. Right?
Yeah.
And then the first real actual point they make is that, he fought against an abolitionist. Why? To preserve the institution of slavery.
John Brown in October 1859. 21 co-conspirators had seized a federal armory and all of them were killed or captured, including John Brown, who was tried and hanged for treason.
I would say among reasons for treason, one of the best ones of all time.
That's easily top 5.
Yeah.
Lee deemed slavery a moral and political evil in any country, but considered it a greater evil to the white man than to the black race.
Just unbelievable that they would include that.
No.
I mean, Jesus.
Blacks are immeasurably better off here than in Africa.
Yeah.
Opposing
I mean, again, that is. I don't think people who are listening to this have any confused about this, but let's just say it very explicitly.
Yes.
That's called white supremacy,
yes.
right there. Like that people are better off under the ownership of other people because they are inferior, right? That is the literal definition of white supremacy.
And not to mention like what we know about why Africa is in the state that it's been in for the last few centuries, which is underdevelopment caused in part because of huge numbers of their young men, particularly, but also young women being pulled over and forced into slavery to build a different continent for generations and generations. Like, okay, I mean, not
to mention the colonialism of the continent in itself.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
It's so disgusting. Keep going, though, because we'll never get through this.
He foresaw no greater.
Okay, so this is also funny. So he foresees no greater calamity than the secession, and yet, what does he do?
I
don't know, Matt.
Blacks are immeasurably better off here than in Africa.
So disgusting, man.
Opposing secession, Lee foresaw no greater calamity for the country than a dissolution of the Union. But when Virginia seceded.
Okay, so what about Virginia being invaded by anti-slave forces of the Union? There's a calamity I hadn't considered, and that is actually worse than secession. So I'm going to go to arms against this country now.
In a close vote, Lee resigned his commission. Despite offers to command Union forces, Lee opted to organize the defense of his native state. After 4 years as Confederate commander, Lee became an icon of reconciliation upon his surrender.
Yeah,
as president of Virginia's Washington College, he favored education for freed slaves. But
okay.
I just want to note on the surrender, like Lee sucked. All Lee needed to do to win the Civil War was to not lose it. This is a point historians make all the time, right? And instead, he kept going way offensive and getting his troops slaughtered, and like Lincoln
getting stuck in Pennsylvania.
Right? Yeah, like pull back, you moron! Anybody playing a fucking video game would be like, yeah, I need to retreat to the hills a little bit and let them wear themselves out in our territory. And I mean, he lost it. Very difficult to lose that, and he lost it. I mean, the idea that he was some superhuman commander is frankly just a retroactive justification of the I mean, look, I'm sure he did some few good things, but that is a massive blunder. Fucking that up. But anyway, let's see what he thought about educating black people, because I'm sure that's the.
I just can't, you got to hit this one because it's so I can't believe somebody actually put this in, right? Like that. This feels like sabotage. This last point. But honestly, I forget how right-wing and racist this organization is.
Oh, yeah.
Upon his surrender. As president of Virginia's Washington College, he favored education for freed slaves but opposed their right to vote.
Oh.
Lee died from a stroke in 1870 and is buried beneath Lee Chapel in what's now Washington and Lee University.
All right.
His legendary warhorse Traveler.
Oh, shut up. I don't want to hear about Traveler. Again, so there was nothing even approaching a convincing argument in that piece. I mean, what's funny about that piece is that basically they lay out just how despicable Robert E. Lee was in his opinion on the institution of slavery as being a net good for black people, which is just, when it comes to evil takes, I mean, that I think is probably one of the worst things you can ever say.
One of the most insidious positions of the last 2 centuries plus
in human history. And then the second big point that they make on race relations is that he thought that it would be okay if black people learned how to read, but no, don't let them vote. Don't let them participate in this society at all.
Oh, what an icon of reconciliation.
And so I went to high school in South Carolina, so I'll just say I've heard a lot of Confederate apologies in my life, right? This is by far one, they're all really bad. Like, no, they are not convincing. They are disgusting. They are meant for incredibly ignorant people. And I don't just mean racist. I mean people who just like don't have a strong grasp of history. Like, one of my favorite things is they'll point out, for example, like some horrible stuff that Lincoln said, which is true, right? And be like, well, actually, see, Lincoln's a racist. But then deify Robert E. Lee, who like actively participated in these systems, and as we've learned from our friends at Prager U, was quite the active racist. So it's not a problem for Lee to be racist, but it is a problem for Lincoln to be racist. Anyways, the funniest argument to me that people make, and they hit at it this video, they don't lean into it, which is surprising because I think that it's not convincing again, but it's at least one that you can like mess around with, is like the gallantry, right? Like that, like the how of the idea of like Robert E. Lee doesn't believe in secession, but he thinks it's his duty, right, and his responsibility, right? Like that's the one that they lean into, and it's really funny in this Prager Lee, it's Prager Lee video, this Prager video, that's the one that they put the least weight on, and the ones that they put the most weight on is him putting down John Brown, and how he didn't think that black people should be able to vote, right?
I mean.
And it's like, and again, like the gallantry, like I just want to say this real quick. Like that's also the dumbest argument too, right? Because it's like, oh, so these guys who are at the top of their society, right, who learn a certain kind of moral code of like honor and responsibility, then when it's time to follow through on that moral code, right, and fight for the systems of slavery and white supremacy, like that's some kind of like moral good. It's like, no, those systems were created to make people okay with what was which was indefensible, which is like the system of human slavery, like all that kind of gallantry stuff, right? About like the Southern aristocrats, like, oh, it's so difficult for us, but we know it's like our kind of duty in society. Like that's the dumbest argument that you can make for this kind of system, because of course that kind of system of like gallantry and like aristocracy was developed to protect that kind of system from criticism.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the idea that you would buy those people as not just like massive liars, like George Washington himself. Like this whole cherry tree notion, like look at him, what he did in the Ohio Territory and killing French messengers,
or or the wooden teeth, which were in fact like the teeth of slaves.
Oh, I didn't know that. Jesus Christ.
Man. Yeah, it's way worse than that. I mean, it's disgusting, and it's just like that was such an incredible video because,
I think it kind of shows where like white supremacists really had it made during the Obama year when they could just talk about Muslims the entire time. Because when they have to like that's foreign enough for them, like they're like super heinous things to be detached enough to not immediately get blowback on them. But this is like, we know who Robert E. Lee was, you fucking morons.
Yeah.
Like people have an understanding, and also that understanding is a lot different than it was 50 years ago. The first I was looking at Robert E. Lee scholarship, like the first big historical I can't say that word historical challenge to like the Lee myth was like in the late 60s, and some guy wrote a piece saying like, would the South have been better if Lee never existed, making that point about arguing like he did, like it shouldn't have been he should have been the general. Like his decisions really fucked him. I mean, maybe that would be, if I would make a statue for Lee, it would be in the sense of like was it the Yankees against the Red Sox where the guy had the ball go through, Buckner had the ball go through his legs? Like I would do a statue like that where Robert E. Lee has the ball going right through his legs.
I think that's good, and
I think that then we can all agree. Remember Robert E. Lee in a constructive way for society.
Yeah, man, it's just such a joke, and these stories really need to go away, because again, I just can't express enough. They're so stupid. Him and like Stonewall Jackson, another guy who's famous because like, oh, he was so nice and he had really good manners, right? And it's just like these are defenses that are made for children. Right? It's just like, oh, a nice guy, a guy who has good manners could never do something wicked, right?
Yeah. And I've plugged it a few times, but just before we go, I'm reading this diary by Robert, Secret Diary of William Byrd of Westover, and this is a century and a half before Lee, a century before Washington, or a generation or two. But like all these guys are drunks. Like these Virginia gentlemen, like they do read like the classics. It's funny. Like I started my day off reading Milton, and then it's like I went to this guy's house and he was wasted, and like people had diarrhea and I've got diarrhea, and like the idea, and then I abused a Negro maid. Like that's the life these guys live. All the stuff about like it was all for show at the time, and people kind of saw through it. And the idea that we're still living it is
that's actually a really good point. It was for show at the time. It was something that was really easy to see through at the time. And now, 150 years later, 170 years later, morons are falling for it again.
And our historians are partly to blame. I mean, I feel like the Hamiltonization, or even the type of the source material for Hamilton, like Chernow and that level of like that kind of historical writing, I think is the stuff. Don't read the histories that you can buy in newspaper stands. I
think that's probably right.